My father was standing by the window when I walked in, holding an unlit pipe he had not smoked in 20 years. His shoulders hunched as if he could hide from his own living room. My mother came out of the kitchen with her hands wrapped tight around a dish, her eyes red, her face drawn, and for a single second I saw an old woman who looked genuinely fragile. Then she opened her mouth, and the fragility vanished behind the familiar, sharp demand for my compliance. She did not ask how I had been, nor did she acknowledge the 5 years of cold silence that lay heavy between us like an iron wall. She simply pointed toward the back bedroom and explained that Megan was currently resting because her nerves were completely shattered from the pressure. The story came out in hurried, defensive fragments, full of excuses about bad luck, terrible friends, and an unfair system that seemed to target Megan through no fault of her own. The truth, stripped of my mother's protective narrative, was far simpler and infinitely worse than I had feared. Megan had abandoned her apartment 3 months prior, leaving behind eviction notices, unpaid utility bills, and a trail of debt that my parents had quietly drained their own small retirement savings to cover. She had been living out of her car with 5-year-old Lily until the vehicle was repossessed, leaving my parents with no choice but to take them both in. My mother leaned close, lowering her voice to a dramatic whisper, and delivered the true purpose of that late-night phone call. She wanted me to sign as a legal co-sponsor for a new lease on an apartment for Megan, and she expected me to hand over my name, my credit score, and my income verification so my sister could start fresh. When I asked how Megan planned to pay the rent after the lease was signed, my mother looked at me as if the question itself was an insult to our bond. She said that family steps up when someone is down. And since I was a nurse, making good money with no children of my own, it was my moral duty to cover the payments whenever Megan fell short. I stood there in the living room I had been banished from, looking at the 2 people who had stolen my savings, discarded me like trash, and then expected me to sign away my financial future for the person who helped destroy it. I looked over at my father, waiting to see if he would finally break his lifelong streak of passive, cowardly silence. He adjusted his posture, looked directly at the carpet near my shoes, and muttered that we all had to make sacrifices for the little girl. That was his contribution to the crisis. A cowardly line meant to manipulate my affection for my niece without forcing him to take any actual responsibility as a patriarch. I turned my head toward the hallway and saw Megan standing in the shadow of the doorway, wearing an oversized sweater, her hair unbrushed, watching me with a look that was half defiance and half expectation. She did not say she was sorry for taking my nursing funds, nor did she express any remorse for the 5 years I had spent working double shifts on empty floors just to survive. She simply crossed her arms and said that I had always been lucky while she had to struggle for every single thing she ever got. The sheer delusion of her words hit me like a physical blow. But instead of losing my temper or shouting, a cold and absolute clarity washed over my entire mind. 5 years ago, I would have panicked, felt guilty, or tried to find a compromise that kept everyone happy at my own expense. But I was not an 89-year-old girl sitting on a friend's couch with an empty bank account and a broken heart anymore. I reached into my bag, pulled out my car keys, and told my mother in a calm, flat voice that I would not be signing any lease. Nor would I be giving Megan a single dollar now or in the future. My mother's face flushed a deep, ugly red, and her voice rose to that familiar screech as she accused me of being a heartless, selfish monster who cared more about money than her own blood. She told me that I was dead to this family if I walked out that door without helping, using the exact same threat she had used 5 years ago to keep me compliant. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that she had already killed my place in this family the night she emptied my account. So her threat had no power over me whatsoever. I turned toward the doorway where Lily was sitting on the bottom step, hugging her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest while watching the adults fight. I knelt down in front of my niece, looked into her quiet eyes, and told her that I loved her very much, and that I was going to make sure she was safe, no matter what happened next. Then I stood up, walked past my shouting mother, walked past my silent father, pushed open the front door, and walked out into the cold afternoon air without looking back once. I did not drive back to Grand Rapids right away. Instead, I parked in a nearby grocery store lot, took out my phone, and called Child Protective Services to report the neglectful conditions and unstable environment Lily was living in. It was the hardest phone call I had ever made in my life. But I knew that protecting a child meant refusing to protect the adults who were actively harming her. Over the next 3 months, the legal machinery moved forward with a cold, unstoppable momentum that my family was completely unprepared to fight or manipulate. The state intervention revealed a history of neglect and financial instability that my parents could no longer cover up with hollow promises and family loyalty guilt trips. When the social workers determined that neither Megan nor my parents could provide a stable home, I stepped forward as a licensed medical professional with a secure income and applied for temporary custody. My mother tried to fight it in court, claiming I was bitter and vindictive, but the judge cared about pay stubs, background checks, and home evaluations rather than dramatic family narratives. The moment the judge granted me temporary guardianship of Lily, I saw the absolute terror in my sister's eyes as she realized that her control over the family dynamic was finally broken. Lily came to live with me in my bright 2-bedroom apartment in Grand Rapids, where she got her own bed, her own quiet space, and a routine that did not change based on an adult's mood swings. It took months for her to stop hiding food under her pillow and to realize that nobody was going to throw her things away or vanish in the middle of the night. My parents tried calling a few times during the first year, mostly to complain about how hard things were for Megan, but I eventually changed my number and established firm legal boundaries through my attorney. They chose their path decades ago when they decided that one daughter mattered, and the other was just a resource to be used and discarded when convenient. Megan eventually moved away to another town to follow some new boyfriend, leaving my parents alone in that quiet, silent house with only their regret and each other for company. My father sent a card once on my birthday with no return address, containing a single line saying he hoped I was doing well, but I threw it in the trash without reading it twice. Today, Lily is 8 years old, thriving in school, laughing and growing into a confident young girl who never has to wonder if she is loved or safe. Looking back at the girl who walked out into the Ohio night with a single bag and an empty bank account, I feel an overwhelming sense of pride for her resilience. I learned that blood makes you related, but choices make you family. And sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from people who demand your destruction as the price of their affection. I saved myself first so that when the time came, I had the strength, the resources, and the power to save the only person who truly needed me.